Today is part of a series of videos. I want to discuss the reality around thorium reactors. Now, I've had many people challenge me, and even in my in the comments on last night's live stream, people said that I'm stupid and all you need to do is deploy thorium reactors, which will be available in 2 years' time, all over South Africa to solve South Africa's grid supply problems, especially in the face of the fact that we will be losing 15 to 16,000 megawatts of coal-fired generation due to decommissioning from the year 2030 onwards. And because of this, the grid will not be able to sustain the South African economy. And I, after those comments, decided that I need to go to the nitty-gritty and the detail, seeing that I was called someone that is not very clever. I'm clever enough to actually go and look at the claims. Because I actually worked in the nuclear industry, I was clever enough to become a licensed reactor operator, of which is very few people capable of doing that on the planet. Then attain my license and then actually run nuclear reactors and connect generators to the grid. Also train new licensed trainees and become a project manager for the steam generator replacement project on the daughter mods. So given all of this background that I have and the fact that I'm this dumb, I will show you what dumbness actually brings you. And doing research on this company and their claims, Copenhagen Atomics, that they will be able to roll out these thorium reactors in a very short space of time. I decided to look at that, and this broadly ties in with a small modular reactor concept that so many people claim is better than large-scale nuclear. So just before I get started, I want to explain that large-scale nuclear, and especially twin packs or six packs like in France, was designed because it was the best option financially. And we have rehashed this in the past. The first nuclear reactors built were small reactors, research reactors, and then reactors used to burn fuel so that we could have enriched uranium, so we could have plutonium, and enrichment processes were then used to get it to weapons grade so that nuclear weapons could be created. Uranium bombs, plutonium bombs, and later on, obviously, something completely different, thermal nuclear weapons or fusion devices. So we started with small reactors. It's not that we don't know how to build them, but now to build them on a commercial scale is a very different thing. Where before these smaller reactors would be used in nuclear submarines, they would be used on aircraft carriers, within the military environment, within that strict environment, or on military bases all over the world. These nuclear reactors would be used, and at Pelindaba and Velindaba up near Pretoria, near Hartbeespoort, we have the Pelindaba Safari 1 reactor in South Africa, which we use to create isotopes. At the moment, in the past, we created the fuel to use for a nuclear weapons program. So small reactors we are familiar with. This is nothing new, and we decided back then in the 50s, 60s and 70s that large-scale nuclear becomes the cheapest over the long term. And it proves itself. If you look at Koeberg Nuclear Power Station, which is being run at 45 cents a kilowatt hour, currently its operational cost, even although the initial outlay was high, after 20 years that power station was basically paid off, and then it's just a cash cow. And if you think of the long term, nuclear will always be cheaper, and people have been trying to find other options that don't cost as much, and a lot of lies and deception go together with that. So let's first look at the competition, whether large scale nuclear or SMRs are the best option. And really at the end of the day, we have created small modular reactors, and there's a need in the power grids around the world again for small modular reactors. But how easy is it really? Can you just create a shipping container size nuclear reactor, ship it around the world, plonk it down in a neighborhood and use it. So I used Gemini and asked some simple questions, and it gives you all the links where you can actually go and look at the company that produces the nuclear reactors, and the responses are fairly simple. So if you will follow with me, those interested in thorium reactors, I will just explain where people miss the point. And maybe when you listen to a nuclear professional, you should consider that they actually know more than you if you were not part of the nuclear industry, and not call them dumb, stupid, or whatever the case may be. So I asked a simple question: are there any commercially available thorium nuclear reactors? Because this is what counts. Do we have a reactor design that has been approved by any nuclear regulator anywhere in the world that can be built, licensed, and then operated? And the answer is no. That's the first thing. There are currently no commercially operated thorium nuclear reactors in the world. That's it. While thorium is highly abundant and offers major safety advantages, it is not fissile on its own and requires a seed material like uranium to start the nuclear reaction. Okay. However, prototype testing and commercial scale development are actively advancing. So here it speaks about China, that's pioneering significant molten salt reactor technology. The 2 megawatt experimental MSR located in Wuwei, Gansu province has successfully achieved the conversion of thorium uranium nuclear fuel, marking a major milestone in thorium research. It is research, and that is great. There's nothing wrong with doing research. Then Copenhagen Atomics, the company that this nincompoop in my comments referred to, and he'll never be able to comment again, because when you comment in such a stupid fashion, you don't deserve the right to open your mouth again. But I hope you watch this, because you're not blocked from viewing this video, and learn a lesson, a valuable lesson. So Copenhagen Atomics, this Danish company, is developing mass-produced shipping container-sized thorium molten salt reactors. That's the reactor. A reactor needs many other things to go with it, and we'll talk about that later. They plan to test a full-scale prototype reactor in Switzerland, a neutral country, and aim for commercial deployment in the 2030s. Well, 2030s can be 2039. Offering set factory costs of $50 million per unit. Now, when people say things like that, it is just publicity. It is nothing else. It has not been deployed. These are plans. There is nothing concrete here. In fact, there is not even a starting point. All they have done up until now is run a molten salt pump for 2 years. That is it. That is all they have to show. Then thorium fuel blending. Thorium can be used in conventional nuclear plants. Some heavy water reactors and light water reactors around the world have operated experimentally with mixed thorium uranium fuel, but none run on an exclusively thorium cycle. So this is the reality with regards to thorium reactors, and a lot of people wax lyrical about thorium at this stage. Then I asked another question. People are claiming that the Danish company can deliver thorium reactors within 2 years and deploy them everywhere instead of larger nuclear power plants, because this is the discussion. I said that we need to desperately, immediately start building the large-scale nuclear power stations, and we need to build them at the necessary anchoring points in Tuispunt, in the Eastern Cape, and then at Duinefontein, and then we should build another nuclear power station to anchor the Northern Cape grid. So, this is the comparison. The claim that Copenhagen Atomics can deliver commercial thorium reactors within 2 years and deploy them everywhere immediately are highly inaccurate exaggerations. Now, I already know the content I'm presenting to you, so I'm giving it to you from a basic AI access to all the information that's on the internet. And there are specific links that you can go and follow to research this further. This is not rocket science. It's fairly simple, okay? So, It's highly inaccurate exaggerations of the company's actual timeline and deployment strategy. Now, this is not what the company is saying. This is what this idiot in my comments is claiming. While the company has achieved major engineering milestones such as running a molten salt pump continuously for 2 years, they are still years away from commercial operations. Because you see, what this person was claiming is that it would take way too long to build these large nuclear power stations, and we can just go and pop in these thorium reactors everywhere. Because within 2 years we can do this. And what AI realizes is that these people are conflating the 2 years of running the pump and getting it mixed up with deployment timeframes. The reality of their timeline, regulatory challenges, and deployment plans breaks down as follows. The timeline 2028 for testing, so this is the company, 2030s for commercial sales. The 2-year confusion likely stems from misinterpreting the upcoming testing milestones of their recent 2-year pump test. The official Copenhagen Atomics roadmap shows a much longer horizon. 2026 to 2027, this is their plan. Subcritical and non-fission prototype testing. So this is building a reactor where they don't actually take the reactor critical, so non-fission. 2028, planned first nuclear chain reaction test at the Paul Scherrer Institute in Switzerland. So 2028, they're planning to have built a reactor and actually do a chain reaction test, like we did in Russia with the pebble bed modular reactor for South Africa. Then the early 2030s target for the very first commercial reactor and initial mass manufacturing. So that's a target. That is not set in stone. So we can build a large nuclear power station by the mid 2030s if we actually get our act together now and place contracts, because you can build a unit within 5 years if you know what you're doing. This was done at Najwa Energy in the UAE. So it can be done. And it depends on where we place the contract, etc., and what kind of cost structure is used. To me, it's not as much about the technology we use as the timelines right now, which is an absolute crisis. Okay. Then 2, the deployment strategy centralized, not everywhere. Social media claims often suggest the shipping container size small modular reactors will be dropped into individual neighborhoods and small factories everywhere. The CEO of this company, Thomas Jan Pedersen, has explicitly debunked this. So he has said that this is not true. But people wax lyrical over things like this, and they don't actually have the understanding of what it means to build any nuclear infrastructure. I've been there. I have project managed modifications. It is complex. Just one pipe misalignment can take months and years out of a project. Something as simple as that. So, centralized hubs, because nuclear site licensing, security, and regulations are incredibly complex and expensive. Copenhagen Atomics plans to cluster multiple units together at large centralized sites to share overhead costs, which makes sense. Okay? But in the end, if that is what you are doing, why not just build a larger nuclear power station? It defeats the entire purpose. And like I said, we have been there. We have looked at the economies of scale, and we knew back in the day, in the 50s, 1957, around there, we knew the larger you can build a nuclear power station, the better economically in the long run. It's not rocket science. It's actually fairly simple. Okay. Industrial focus, the initial commercial target is powering heavy, energy-intensive industries like hydrogen production and aluminium smelting rather than decentralized neighborhood grids. Now, these 100 megawatt reactors are actually 100 megawatts thermal. You'll be lucky to get 40 megawatts electrical out of that. Keep that in the back of your mind, because this is where people also misspeak themselves. When Coburg delivers 950 megawatts, it's electrical. The reactor delivers 2,775 megawatts thermal. And this is important to understand. So the Coburg reactors are by many factors greater in scale and size and what they can do than this little reactor. The regulatory bottleneck, this is when it comes to the regulators that has to approve. Even if the physical hardware is manufactured in a factory within days, nuclear regulatory approval cannot be bypassed. Licensing a complete new reactor type, molten salt, and a new fuel cycle, thorium, takes years of intense scrutiny from International Atomic Energy Agency. So once they've proven concept, and they're doing it in Switzerland in a neutral zone, then they still need to get licensing and approval from other countries to even allow the technologies. And that takes years. This reality dictates why widespread deployment will take over a decade rather than 24 months. Once you have a product, it'll take over a decade. So you're talking about mid-2040s, if this works out. Okay, and then I looked at the cost comparison, and the cost claim from this company is impressive. Okay, I asked it to compare it to Koeberg Nuclear Power Station in rands and cents, and what they are targeting is 36.4 cents a kilowatt hour, compared to Koeberg running at the moment at about 45 cents a kilowatt hour operating cost. That is impressive, and it's if this can be achieved, it'll be a huge incentive for these SMRs to be built if it can be done safely. But we are far away from achieving that right now. So, the three big caveats behind the numbers. 1. Sunk capital versus new infrastructure. Eskom's official primary fuel and operational cost for Koeberg is exceptionally low. Around 11.3 cents to 45 cents per kilowatt hour. This is because a massive overnight capital cost to physically build a station in the 1980s is already clear. So Koeberg has been paid for, so it's just operating costs now. Okay, Copenhagen Atomic's target of 36 cents per kilowatt hour is highly competitive for a brand new build because everything is being built from scratch. But there are more catches, and we'll get to that just now. But it cannot beat an existing pyro-efficient plant on pure operating costs. Okay. Then the refurbishment reality check, it talks about Koeberg's refurbishment, etc. That might increase the long-term plant operation expansion, which could increase the operating cost over time. And then it looks at the South African grid context. Koeberg feeds massive amounts of base load, 1,860 megawatts, that's electrical, straight into the national grid. Copenhagen Atomic's 100 megawatt thermal units, which means there's not electrical output, are designed for industrial self-generation. So it's a very different purpose altogether. The plan is not to go and just put these all over the grid. However, there's this mindset that this is what you can do. You don't need a large grid anymore. You just decentralize everything. And I want to see how most of the people in the country do under that kind of system. Okay. Placing these modular units in South Africa would require a completely different industrial regulatory framework than what Eskom currently uses to manage Koeberg. And then I asked the question, how do you put SMRs inside a country such as South Africa when cash in transit highs are a regular occurrence? And, you know, I hadn't told it at this stage that I was a nuclear professional, that I worked at Koeberg Nuclear Power Station. And it says that because everything is heavily shielded within nuclear, and because you put it in a protected environment and all that type of nonsense, that somehow it would be safe, because it speaks about the fuel is frozen, toxic and heavily shielded, as if that had stopped someone before. Zero street value for criminals. The hub security model not dropped anywhere. As noted, the SMR developers, these reactors will not be dropped into isolated, unguarded locations or local neighborhoods. But this is the kind of thing that mainstream media, and especially people trying to promote small modular reactors, put out there into the public mind space, is that you can just plonk it anywhere in their own factory. It doesn't work like that, okay, at all. And then they speak about centralized citadels in South Africa. SMRs would like to be grouped into a power parks or heavily fortified industrial zones, where you go and put a whole lot of these down. And soon, when you actually look at, it's not a bunch of shipping containers stacked on top of each other, you're going to get a completely different mindset of the reality around us. Because the turbine is not in that shipping container, only the reactor, nothing else. So there's a load of stuff that needs to be connected to it from the outside. So it's not like you can stack a whole lot of reactors on top of each other and Bob's your uncle. You have power, like a generator you plonk down in a backyard. Then they speak about military-grade defense instead of a standard private security guards who are often overwhelmed in cash-in-transitized nuclear facilities in South Africa are legally mandated to be protected by specialized, heavily armed state tactical units and the National Key Points Act. Okay, I understand this. It still doesn't understand my background in nuclear at this stage. So that is correct. But if you're just going to pop these down wherever, are you going to make each one of these sites a national key point? That is my question. Then logistics do not match cash in transit modus operandi. And then regulatory non-negotiables. And then I said, I'm thinking of pure sabotage. Then evaluating a nuclear facility's resilience against pure sabotage, intentional acts designed to cause a catastrophic release of radiation or destroy critical national infrastructure is a core part of nuclear engineering. So it's trying to tell me that they are going to try and engineer this reactor so it's sabotage proof. It speaks here about the ultimate weapon against sabotage, passive safety physics. I understand all of that. Then insider threat mitigations, explosive resistance, and the environmental reality of a breach. And then I just told it, please, I started working at Kubik in 1992 and ran nuclear reactors. Can we cut the nonsense? That's literally what I said to AI, and it said, understood, and my apologies for the boilerplate layout. Respect to your background, running the Framatome pressurized water reactors at Kubik starting in the early 1970s. Means you know exactly what real-world operations, thermal margins, and defense in depth actually look like. Okay, now we actually get into the nitty-gritty. Because once you tell the AI where you come from, it changes its tune completely. So the timeline hype. It says, let's cut the marketing hype and look at the actual engineering reality of Copenhagen Atomics versus what you ran at Kubik. The timeline hype. The online claims that they can deliver in 2 years are pure venture capital talk. So now we're cutting to the chase. The reality, as of 2026, they are still doing non-fission salt loops to validate loop mechanics and metallurgy. They just passed a 2-year pump loop test loop. So it took them 2 years to just test a pump running in a loop with very hot salt, okay, molten salt. The official goal for a critical chain reaction test at the Paul Scherrer Institute isn't until 2028. They have no commercial license anywhere on earth. For someone who understands nuclear regulatory compliance, they are at least a decade away from a commercial grid connection. At least. 2. The sabotage argument, the nonsense check. You know exactly how Kubik is hardened, massive containment structures, heavy control rod drive mechanism, redundant safety injection systems, and backed up diesel generators to prevent the loss of coolant, accident, or station blackout, what we call the LOCA. When SMR advocates talk about passive safety, they gloss over the real-world operational challenges that a veteran operator will immediately spot. The chemistry nightmare, molten fluoride salts, lithium, thorium, uranium mixtures are intensely corrosive. If saboteurs cause localized damage, or if a heat exchanger fails, managing chemistry online with a standard containment building setup is unproven. They have no idea what that is going to look like. And as problems crop up, they're going to have to fix it along the way. And the freeze plug reality, they claim a passive freeze plug will just drop the fuel into a dump tank if power is lost. But as an operator, you know that active systems fail. Valves stick and a physical salt plug can suffer from localized crusting, trapping the fuel in the core during a critical geometry shift. Now, I'm familiar with all of those problems, especially with the fact that we use borated water at Kubik and how boron can solidify lines. The fuel is the waste. In a PWR like Kubik, the fission products stay locked inside the fuel pellets and zirconium cladding until refueling. In a molten salt reactor, the volatile fission products like xenon and iodine are continually bubbled out of the liquid fuel online. A saboteur doesn't need to melt the core, they just need to breach the off-gas filtration system to cause a major radiological release. And this is something people need to understand. At Koeberg, all the radionuclides is trapped inside the fuel unless you get a pinhole leak, which can be managed to clean up of the primary system. So these are all things that people need to consider. The small things that most people that don't understand the nuclear fuel cycle, which is fairly similar in any nuclear reactor, and the particle physics that actually take place. 3, the economics, rands versus reality. The claim of 20 cents to 36 cents per kilowatt hour for these SMRs assumes one-of-a-kind mass assembly line production, essentially building reactors like Toyotas. And I like that analogy. As someone who saw the capital expenditure and O&M realities of Koeberg in the 90s, you know that nuclear costs are driven by quality assurance, specialized metallurgy, and regulatory paperwork. A lot of regulatory paperwork, a lot of departments working on that. A small 100 megawatt thermal unit loses all economies of scale, even if the hardware is cheap. That is the reality. The security footprint, emergency planning zones, and specialized staff required by the National Nuclear Regulator mean the overhead per megawatt will be massive. They aren't replacing Koeberg anytime soon. Okay. I mentioned that I was the project manager on the steam generator daughter modifications implementation. And I just said my absolute respect. Managing the daughter modifications for the SGR means you have faced the absolute peak of nuclear project management friction, dealing with the complex piping layouts, seismic supports, insulation, instrumentation lines, access platforms required when changing massive primary to secondary boundary components. You know exactly what happens to a timeline and a budget. Yes, I do. When the NNR demands exhaustive radiography, wall qualifications, and strict code compliance. All things that I worked with intently, while the country is desperate to minimize outage days. I understand this fully. Let's skip the textbook explanations and look at the project management and financial mismatch between real-world nuclear modifications and the SMR thorium model, because there's many other SMRs being planned as well, not necessarily thorium. I just chose this as an example. This applies to all of them. Okay. 1. The plug-and-play fallacy for SMRs. SMR developers pitch these systems as modular units you simply drop in, but your experience with daughter modifications highlights the exact blind spot in their financial modeling. The fieldwork nightmare. Now, I was hands-on when it came to the daughter modification implementation at Koeberg. Even if a thorium reactor vessel arrives pre-assembled from a factory, it still has to tie into a balance of plant system. Because there's no generator, there's no cooling, there's no nothing. It's just the reactor in a shipping container, or something similar to a shipping container. I slashed that out later. Custom engineering, connecting secondary steam loops, cooling water systems, and instrumentation lines to local site conditions always introduces unpredicted variations. Many unpredicted variations. As you know from the SGR project, a few millimeters of misalignment on a heavy component completely derails the schedule. It can derail it by months or years. The idea that you can bypass this localized engineering overhead with a modular reactor is a fantasy. 100% accurate. It is a fantasy. These people live on some cheap drugs. 2. The financial control reality. This is about escalating finances, where things become more expensive, unforeseen things. Traditional nuclear relies on scaling up megawatt output to dilute fixed overhead costs. You want to scale it up, not down. Security, regulatory, compliance, emergency planning zones, environmental impact assessments. The larger, the cheaper, because you do the same thing for a small reactor or for a large reactor. So the more power output you get per effort you put in, the cheaper it is. And I mean, like I said, we worked this out in the 1950s already. And now we make as if we become more intelligent, and now we're trying to make things smaller again. It makes absolutely no sense. except for certain specific requirements, maybe in space, military applications, etc. When a startup promises a 100 megawatt thermal unit for $50 million, their math only works on paper. The moment you introduce the cost of specialized labor, strict nuclear quality assurance, and NNR licensing delays, the initial factory hardware cost becomes a fraction of the total projected expenditure. For a small output, the financial payback period stretches past the point of commercial viability for private investors. So, it becomes a nightmare, and this is why most of these SMRs have never come off the ground. Because what they are finding out with wind and solar now is that once you start to want to compete with nuclear that's been running for 40 years, you cannot. It is the cheapest. So regulatory restrictions and the NNR, South Africa's regulatory environment, is notoriously thorough. The NNR is not going to look at a first-of-a-kind thorium liquid fuel loop and fast-track it because it is small. Not at all. I know people at the NNR. They are not going to just buy this nonsense. You're going to have to come up with a serious case. A new fuel cycle means rewriting the entire safety analysis report, and I understand that. I've read Koeberg's safety analysis report. I worked with people that wrote the new safety analysis reports. The licensing and design review process alone would take years and cost millions in regulatory fees before a single cubic meter of concrete is poured at a site like Duinefontein. For instance, if they, instead of replacing Koeberg with more larger units, build small little thorium reactors and put a whole lot of them down to try and offset basically what the 2 cubic units are putting out now. So this is once again SMR versus large scale. The 2-year delivery narrative completely ignores the structural reality of nuclear safety culture and project governance that you live through at Koeberg. Then I asked, what are the chances that thorium reactors get modular approval as claimed by this Danish company in other countries? That they'll get approval anyway. The chances that Copenhagen Atomics or any advanced SMR developer will secure blanket modular approval across multiple countries within their stated time frame are exclusively low. So it's not going to be easy for them to do this. Now, I'm not saying that they can't produce a product that can be used, but you need to know what the product actually is, instead of the fables, fairy tales, gnomes and trolls under bridges that some people claim it is. So for someone who knows how a regulator operates, the math on their approval strategy does not add up. The marketing pitch relies on a concept called fleet licensing or type approval, similar to how Boeing gets an aircraft certified once and it is legally allowed to fly in any country. It doesn't work like that in nuclear. The structural and regulatory hurdles making a multi-country modular approval incredibly unlikely include the fiction of international reciprocity. So it means that other countries will just do the same as the first country. The International Atomic Energy Agency sets global safety guidelines, but it has zero legal authority to license a reactor. So the IAEA is just a watchdog. At Koeberg, we have IAEA cameras installed at the fuel pools in the reactor building to look at what is happening there to make sure that no nuclear fuel goes where it's not supposed to. Every single country guards its sovereign nuclear regulatory rights with absolute intensity. If Copenhagen Atomics gets their design approved via the UK's Generic Design Assessment or the GDA, where they submit an entry application, that approval means absolutely nothing to the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, or South Africa's NNR. So in every country, you have to go through that whole process again. To deploy everywhere, they have to restart the multi-year, multi-million-dollar licensing process from scratch in every individual jurisdiction. That is how the world works now. How the world works would have to change drastically for this to be able to roll out the way these people plan. Unless they know something that many of you may not be aware of with regards to what will happen in the world and the governments and these regulatory frameworks, etc. Number 2, regulatory framework formatted for PWRs. So at the moment, all the regulatory frameworks are formatted for PWRs because that's the most prolific power station on the planet at the moment. And most of the power stations under construction are PWRs. Pressurized water reactors like Koeberg, not a small modular reactor or a molten salt reactor. National regulators are fundamentally built around light water and pressurized water reactor technologies. The regulatory framework from containment building requirement to source term calculations and emergency core cooling criteria were written based on the exact physics of plants like Koeberg, which is a Westinghouse design, even although it was built by the French. A molten salt reactor, where the fuel is liquid, the fission process products are gaseous and continuously scrubbed online, and the safety systems are passive, requires regulators to completely invent a new licensing framework from the ground up. So they are going to be working with something completely new. Regulators do not move fast when writing new rules, especially for liquid fuel geometries. They are not going to be the people that gave approval to something that becomes a liability to the nuclear industry later. So I don't even know if a regulator exists right now that will approve these SMRs. The design basis threat is site specific. Even if a regulator gives a factory built module a standard design approval stating the hardware itself is safe, you cannot pre-approve the deployment. As you know from operations, safety is highly dependent on site-specific criteria, the seismic, geological variability, the security profile, etc. Okay, which is different in different countries. Then real-world precedents, the SMR graveyard, and this is important to understand. We have already seen what happens when advanced SMR startups collide with real-world regulatory timelines, and this is why I think, especially the tech elite, wants to change how the world works, basically, and control it, because the idea with the tech elite is to build these SMRs and just deploy them at the AI data centers instead of all these gas turbines which cost an absolute fortune to run. So NuScale Power, very good example. They were the darlings of the US SMR movement. They became the first to get an SMR design certified by the US NRC. So the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, it took them over half a decade and $500 million just to get the paperwork approved for a standard light water design. They ultimately had to cancel their flagship commercial project because the compounding regulatory delays caused the projected cost of the power to skyrocket. So the initial dream turned into something completely different. Copenhagen Atomic's current position, they do not even have a domestic nuclear regulator to talk to. Denmark hasn't got one. They have no state agency capable of approving nuclear fission research. This is exactly why they had to partner with the Paul Scherrer Institute in Switzerland, just to get a site to run a basic low power criticality experiment. And it'll be very low power and very tiny. So the verdict. The idea of a standard containerized thorium reactor being rubber stamped by global regulators for deployment everywhere ignores the foundational reality of nuclear safety culture. So this is why many people have approached me in the past, but what about thorium reactors? And I said, but it's not even a thing, because they don't understand nuclear regulation. So you would need to change the planet, governments, bureaucracy, all sorts of things, if you want to change this reality. And then we will be living in a very dangerous world. They are trying to apply a software automotive manufacturing mentality to the most conservative, risk-averse regulatory environment on Earth. And I can attest to that. If you want to look at the engineering bottlenecks, we could dive into metallurgical degradation challenges of molten fluoride salts over a 5-year cycle. So this is not even looking at the problems that comes with a molten salt design, but there's many other SMR models that don't necessarily use that. And then I asked, how large could these 100 megawatt units be? Size of the containers, like literally. The Copenhagen Atomic's 100 megawatt thermal units are explicitly designed to have the exact footprint of a standard 40-foot shipping container. So that's the idea, that's the marketing pitch that they give. However, because you cannot use a standard twin-walled commercial steel cargo box to contain a nuclear system, they use a heavy purpose-built nuclear-approved structural frame with slightly expanded exterior clearances to accommodate insulation and structural reinforcement. You have to insulate the reactor. I mean, it's incredibly hot. You can imagine with molten salt. So a lot of insulation needed inside there. The precise physical dimensions of the modules are 12 meters in length and then 3.2 meters wide instead of the normal standard 2.4 meters of a shipping container. So it's a bit wide to transport on the road, so it'll be an oversized load. Okay. And then the height is 3.65 meters, which is fairly high. But that is tiny for a 100 megawatt thermal reactor. Like I said, about 40 megawatts electrical if you're lucky. Then what is packed inside that space? As an operator, you'll immediately see how tightly they have to package the system. They call it an onion core design. Now, before I even read through all of this, this is the first thing I said. I said this is all bogus nonsense. You cannot build a 100 megawatt thorium reactor into that container complete with generator. Absolute nonsense. And I explained to them why. I worked with people that worked on the PBMR design, and when it was at 60 megawatts, the size of the building it would require with all the auxiliary systems, etc., was many factors bigger than the shipping container, and that was a 60 megawatt unit. So it didn't make sense to me at all. And then it said, you are 100% correct. And your experience with the pebble bed modular reactor team hits the nail right on the head. When Copenhagen, Atomics or other SMR startups show a rendering of a 40-foot shipping container, they are talking only about the nuclear island, the heat source, nothing else. They completely omit the rest of the thermal to electrical cycle, because putting a complete 100 megawatt powertrain inside that footprint is a thermodynamic impossibility, obviously. So I didn't even need to read what it said before. I can tell you quickly, it's the first time I'm actually going through it now. The core region located right in the center is a 2.3 meter diameter tank. It holds the heavy water moderator, a thorium blanket, and the central channels where the hot lithium fluoride fuel salt circulates and reaches temperatures of around 600 degrees Celsius. So very hot, very dangerous. At Koeberg, the hottest temperature you're going to get is just over 300 degrees Celsius. The thermal barrier is only about an inch, 2.5 centimeters of thermal insulation separating that 600 degree C core from the outer cold regions. The heavy water requires continuous external cooling loop integration. The dump and catch tanks, if something goes wrong, they say that you can dump the fuel and then a shielding wall and all that type of thing. Okay. So 100 megawatts thermal versus 100 megawatts electric. And this is what I mentioned earlier. The 100 megawatt figure they advertise is thermal power, not electrical output. So a lot of people don't understand this because they are not experts in power generation. At a standard conversion efficiency of roughly 40%, a single container only outputs about 40 megawatts electrical of actual electricity when you have a 100 megawatt thermal reactor. So that is what you're getting for that $50 million US. To get anywhere near a standard 100 megawatt electrical output, you would need 3 of these containers running in parallel just to feed the steam loop alone. And the steam loop is outside the container. Then the missing balance of plant, and this is what I love, because this is what a lot of people don't see. Like at the SGR project, I was not involved with the installation of the steam generators itself. I was involved in the massive upgrades that had to happen in other parts of the plant to make this upgraded steam generator replacement possible, so we can actually get more megawatts. These steam generators are more efficient, etc. And it was a huge undertaking, massive. All the modifications that had to be done to current systems to make that possible. So, as you know from the PBMR layout, which use helium gas driving a direct cycle gas turbine before scaling the steam, the reactor vessel itself is only a fraction of the footprint. Copenhagen atomic container does not contain the generator. To turn the 600 degrees molten salt into electricity, you still require a massive separate building, housing. This is all that needs to go into this other massive building. The secondary, tertiary salt loops, intermediate heat exchangers to isolate the radioactive primary salt. So you are circulating radioactive salt. And this is a problem, because if that leaks, you have contamination issues. So that building that you build needs to be a containment. The steam generated turbines, massive high pressure steam turbines or supercritical CO2 turbo machinery. So it depends on what type of cycle you choose. Then the condensers and cooling towers, because you need to cool this lot. Huge infrastructure to dump the remaining 60 megawatts of waste thermal energy. The container is just the boiler. The actual power plant footprint is still a heavy industrial complex. And then the weight and shielding math, where it's talking, comparing the PBMR, which is also a modular reactor, to this thorium SMR. The PBMR used solid graphite pebbles and helium gas, meaning the core structural layout was physically large to handle the gas volume. It wasn't small at all, but required a massive concrete silo for structural containment, and this is important. For a molten salt reactor, the high density fuel means the core can be small, but the shielding math doesn't lie. A half meter of steel shielding inside a 3.2 meter wide container leaves you with a tiny internal envelope. If you factor in the weight of the molten lead or steel shields needed to stop high energy gamma radiation from the fission products, that single container would weigh hundreds of tons. So how do you move hundreds of tons like that? It would crack standard roads and exceed the actual load limits of almost any heavy transport vehicle on Earth. So the verdict: the venture capital pitch treats a nuclear reactor like a diesel generator you can drop behind a hospital. And that is basically, especially the hype around the thorium reactors or most SMRs. But as you know from working with PBMR designers, the moment you have to manage fluid dynamics, thermal hydraulic boundaries, which is basically lubricants, etc., oils, secondary power conversion and shielding, never mind the electrical, the laws of physics dictate the size of the building. It's that simple. And you need ventilation and all the other things. The container is a marketing gimmick. The actual plant is still a major construction project. Then it speaks about maintenance, refueling, and human factors. And it compares that to Koeberg, where, there's so many things that people will say is a huge advantage if we can build thorium reactors. But it's if we could. People have tried for a very long time and no one has come up with a viable design that can actually use thorium in a viable way, in a cheap way. And if this company manages to do it, that will be absolutely incredible. But anyone thinking that it's going to happen anytime soon is not living in the real world. Like I said, if the world changes, if the world we live in changes, it's a very different story. But you can look forward to the next chapter as I expose what is happening in South Africa, what has happened in the past with regards to our electricity grid, because it's a grid that needs to be supplied. It's a grid that needs to be kept at 50 hertz, stable, so that your bedside clock can work and all the other electrical appliances can work as they were designed. And load shedding was implemented in South Africa to ensure that your equipment can work properly. And as I said yesterday in my live stream, do go and watch a live stream. I will put a link to that at the end screen of this video. You will understand that if we drop below 47.5 hertz, all the generators on our grid would disconnect. And in the case of these SMRs, they are not designed for that kind of setup. They are designed for independent power supply, not large-scale grids. So people that think that you can just go and stack a whole lot of these all over the country and just make it work, you need to understand the nuclear industry a lot better. And you're going to struggle to understand it better than I do, as someone that's actually worked in the nuclear industry, when you are on the outside. It doesn't matter how much you have read up online. If you don't understand, you cannot put into context what you read. I really thank you, and you can look forward to the next video soon.